Study session to order. Could we please start with a roll call, Don?
Mayor Coombs,
Present.
Council members Bagley, Finley, Levison, Samori, Santos, Witt. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So we stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public invited to be heard. The first person on the list is Bob Norris, and I guess Joan Peck is second. So you'll have 3 minutes to speak, so please state your name and address before you begin speaking.
Okay. Mayor Coombs, council members, I'm Bob Norris. I live at 532 Ryder Ridge Drive here in Longmont. And I'm here tonight actually to thank you all. You'll remember in December you voted to provide some funds for El Comite to remodel the office. And tomorrow night, anytime you have the opportunity, but tomorrow night we're going to have an open house. We'd like you to come over between 4:30 and 6, and you'll see what a great return you got on your money. Once we got in there, we found that we had to change our plans a bit, and we did more work than we anticipated, but at about the same cost. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 worth of professional labor donated from our clients. And the place is beautiful, it's much more functional, and we really wouldn't have got started with this without all your help and without the help of Karen Roney and I'm going to mess up his name, Don Whoopfler. Okay, thank you. And Chris Allison from the staff all came around, gave us some advice and helped out. So let's hope we'll see you there tomorrow. And again, thanks. You've all made this possible.
Thank you, Bob. Joan Peck.
Mayor Coombs and City Council members, my name is Joan Peck. I reside at 1935 Spruce Avenue in Longmont. I'm here tonight to ask you not to adopt the rules and regulations submitted by staff for oil and gas. Direct them to amend the regulations to say a minimum of 1,000 feet setbacks within the city and unincorporated city limits. Councilman Samori, a couple of weeks ago, you made a statement to the effect that we've been breathing gas fumes from automobiles for quite a while. So basically, what's the problem with the emissions from the wells? You're correct. We have been breathing the emissions, but that's only one of the reasons for the push for hybrids and all electrical vehicles. Americans have always pushed back when corporations use unhealthy practices. Remember DDT from Monsanto Corporation? How about the tobacco industry with first and secondhand smoke where we eat and play? And John's Manville Corporation manufacturing cancerous asbestos. All of these corporations are still making billions of dollars profits, but they've agreed to live symbiotically with the people. That's what we want from the oil and gas industry, and you have to help us. These new rules and regulations do not do that. Councilman Santos, you mentioned that you fear we'll lose everything if the state sues us. We're losing everything with these new rules and regulations. The state has to go against its own constitution to sue us. I have a copy of the Constitution, which I've read, and I'm going to read 3 or 4 things of the many things I've earmarked pertaining to corporations, environments, etc. The first thing is from District Courts, Article 6, Judicial Department, Section 11. The district court shall have original jurisdiction to determine all controversies upon relation of any person on behalf of the people concerning the rights, duties, and liabilities of railroad, telegraph, or toll road companies or corporations. So the district courts are the ones that do that. The second one is Article 15, Section 8. The police powers of the state shall never be abridged or so construed as to permit corporations to conduct their business in such manner as to infringe the equal rights of individuals or the general well-being of the state. The third thing is on irrigation, and it is Section 6. When the waters of any natural stream are not sufficient for the service of all those desiring the use of the same, those using the water for domestic purposes shall have the preference over those claiming for any other purpose, and those using the water for agricultural purposes shall have preference over those using the same for manufacturing purposes. And then the fourth thing that I want to read to you is the General Assembly, this is Article 5, Section 25. Bummer.
Sorry, Joan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Carla, and I just can't read your... Okay.
Okay, I'm Carla Behrens. I live at 904 Little Leaf Court in Longmont, and I am wanting to continue in this vein about the oil and gas regulations. The negative national PR the state faces in suing its own people who want their constitution enforced will give the Attorney General pause. So who will sue us? Maybe the oil and gas industry. But even though the industry votes and gets legislators on their side with money, Corporations answer to a higher power, their shareholders. Is it worth the national attention to sue a small city for a minor subcontractor named Top and risk the value of their stock dropping? I think not. The people of Longmont have courage to take on this issue and fight it. Does our city council have the political courage to say no to Top and the gas and oil industry? Maybe this should end up in court. I am as concerned as a parent and a grandmother. My children live here. I just recently went out to the airport, looking at the oil and gas on Weld County on both sides of the highway. I am totally distraught about the possibility of oil wells going in near the schools and parks and everything else, although they're already there. But I looked at the red map, the map where they could do whatever they want. And it's truly appalling. I mean, it will destroy the city. It will destroy our property values. But especially the water and air quality. This state is a state that is drawn tourism. Is it going to look like West Texas? Is that what we want? And I really, really believe that we need to have the courage to stand up and claim our rights. And I really wish that you had not agreed not to extend the moratorium, because I think we need more time to study the harmful effects. And that I do believe that the first function of government is to protect the health and welfare of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Rempel, followed by Kay Fissinger.
Good evening, Mayor Combs and Council. Tim Rempel, live 2954 Spinnaker Place. Have been there for 25 plus years now. Longtime resident of Longmont, also an avid skier. I'm concerned about water quality implications. I brought what is the benchmark that is kept by what's called SNOTEL minus the W, a group down in Lakewood that charts the water and snowpack in Colorado. This is a graph of this year. The graph of this year, if you happen to go look at it online, you can see is basically a picture of a disaster. The current statewide percentage of normal is 40%. If we have another year like this, and we face water restrictions, and we take on using significant amounts of additional water to support oil and gas drilling, is that really going to be prudent? It's a little bit of a risk, I think, like a floodplain management kind of situation. Last year was a wonderful year. This year the snowpack is terrible. You have a couple of bad years in a row, and if we're on water restrictions for residential purposes, we just heard a little bit about that. What's that going to mean for the citizens of Longmont? What's it going to mean for the industry in Longmont? I happen to work in high tech. I've worked in high tech all these years in this town in the Front Range. I've seen the evolution of that here. I think we have to be very, very careful that we don't destroy the reputation of the entirety of Boulder County in the high-tech community by exactly turning this into West Texas, complete with the smells and the lack of water. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Kay Fissinger, followed by Frederick Day.
Kay Fissinger, 2199 Creekside Drive. This document of Longmont's proposed oil and gas regulation shames this city, and it should shame you. But I suspect it won't. It's nothing more than a capitulation to the oil and gas industry and a betrayal of the citizens of Longmont. As a home rule city, you have the legal opportunity to do much more. You met in executive session on March 27th and April 3rd to discuss draft oil and gas regulations and to receive legal advice and obtain instructions regarding the same. It doesn't take a Philadelphia lawyer or a rocket scientist to determine what, when, and where your decisions took place. Tonight's discussion is likely to be nothing more than a dog and pony show to once again pretend to the Longmont public that you are listening to their testimony, the evidence of the dangers of drilling within the city, and the threats to human health, safety, and welfare from fracking. Our health, safety, and welfare are constitutionally, both United States and Colorado, and statutorily guaranteed. Yet our Democratic governor, our Republican Attorney General, and the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, the oil and gas industry's sock puppet, prefer to thumb their collective noses at the people and smile all the way to the bank to deposit campaign contributions from their benefactors. The same holds true of most of the members of Longmont City Council, who occupy their seats by virtue of the financial assistance and the dirty campaign tactics of Western American Tradition Partnership, and its local sympathizers who do not know enough or care enough to even protect themselves and their families. It was no accident that American Tradition Partnership first showed its rabidly anti-people face in 2009 in Longmont. This organization, funded by the extraction industries and the Koch brothers, knew the oil and gas industry was moving its way to the western end of the Wattenberg Field and the Niobrara Play, and needed a Longmont City Council who would play ball with them, pun intended. They got it, and they got much more last year. And now the people of Longmont are getting fricking fracked. So you'll sacrifice your personal integrity, the well-being of your community, and the health and safety of your families on the altar of oil and gas profits. And I suspect you'll even use nauseatingly familiar buzzwords of your political party to justify the decisions you made weeks, if not months ago. But don't expect respect or support for your choices. And don't expect that the community will take your actions lying down or bending over. This is not over until the proverbial fat lady sings. And you can be sure she is just warming up.
Thank you, Kay. Next, Frederick Day, followed by Judith Blackburn.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Frederick Day. I live at 2342 Billings Lane here in Longmont. Excuse me. I want to ask you to reinstate the requirements for green, non-toxic fracking fluids. At the February 21st study session, which I sat through, and it was a long session, you deleted those requirements. When that section of the draft requirements came up, the only comment was by Councilwoman Witt, who stated that she had received an email from a constituent that worked in the industry and said that those things don't exist. At that point, the council voted 7-0 to delete the requirement. As it turns out, that was bad information that she was given. I prepared a statement that was read by a friend of mine at the February 28th meeting, because I had a conflict that night, with references and documentation showing that industry people have been touting green fracking fluids for just about a year. In person, I was here on the 13th of March to reiterate the same thing and provide the same list of references. The current draft justification for deleting the requirement, I notice, is that those fluids are not generally used and they may present operational challenges. In other words, it's more expensive to use them. If it was less expensive, obviously it would be the normal procedure. So the industry can now run around and claim that they have green fracking fluids, but in the field they never use them. Instead, they use the same toxic, carcinogenic materials that they've always been using. So I urge you to reinstate the requirements and have the industry either put up or shut up. I don't believe the COGCC or the state can sue you because of the requirement, because it does not impose an undue burden on the operators, since they're the ones that claim they have the procedures and the materials. In summary, I think if you continue to leave that as a deleted requirement, you'll be on record as putting the profits of the oil and gas industry above the health and safety of your citizens. I believe that's a conflict of your oath of office. Thank you.
Judith Blackburn, followed by Teresa Foster.
Judith Blackburn, 3724 Oakwood Drive. Good evening, council members and Mayor Crooms. I come before you tonight with a heavy heart, after reading the second version of your proposed oil and gas regulations for the city of Longmont, which it seems to me are much weaker than the first version. I was especially appalled to see that you rescinded your earlier decision to require closed-loop water waste removal and are now going to allow open pits within some city zones. And you've pulled back on requiring green flat fracking fluids. Like Frederick Day before me, I believe big oil has incorrectly led you to believe that green fracking fluids are not an option. Tonight is not the first time I've come before you to encourage you to challenge the state's preemption in relation to your charge to protect the health and safety of Longmont's citizens. As more and more studies are validating the heretofore unpublicized dangers of air pollution in particular from the fracking process, and as the EPA is about to announce new standards on fracking, it would seem to me to be in your best interest, as well as ours, to delay on accepting drilling applications until all of our legal recourses are explored. Given that you've been adamant about not extending our moratorium, I would at a minimum encourage you to insist on a 1,500-foot setback protecting homes, schools, and parks from fracking wells. Current research affirms that air quality is compromised for a half a mile around fracking sites, so insisting on a 1,500-foot setback would seem to be a no-brainer. After all, we have a precedent. Marijuana dispensaries right now are required to sit 1,000 feet from schools. And I don't think the reason for that has anything to do with carcinogenic fumes, but I might be wrong. I understand that Governor Hickenlooper Task Force has yet to make a recommendation on setbacks, so perhaps Councilman Bagley still has time to influence what is decided there. If not at the state level, then perhaps here. I hope so. In the meantime, please know that in the long run, your authority rests on state mandates as much as on the will of, not so much on state mandates as on the will of the citizenry who voted you in and who will be most displeased if their health and property values are compromised as a result of your short-sightedness. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Teresa Foster's next, followed by Barbara Fernandez.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Teresa Foster at 712 Thornwood Way. Who does our City Council serve? Are you serving the needs of the very few, the mineral rights owners, or are you serving the rights of the many and supporting our inalienable rights as citizens and community members for clean air, clean water, and clean soil? When you were voted into office, you also took an oath to protect the health, safety, and well-being of the 86,000 people who live in the city of Longmont. Over the past 4 months, concerned citizens have been showing up week after week to speak out against this industry, the oil and gas industry. Have you really been listening to the will of the people? It's quite clear that if you enact version 2 of the draft regulations, the truth will be revealed of who you intend to serve, the oil and gas industry. Are they to be your masters? Or have all the provisions that would protect Longmont citizens been discarded? Are you willingly going to allow injection wells within the borders of the city of Longmont in specific industrial zones? Why has the language been stricken that would hold oil and gas drillers accountable for bad behavior? There is no way that you can protect the health, safety, and well-being of your constituents with version 2 of the draft regulations. If you allow this most recent version to be passed, you are inviting the fox into the henhouse. I ask you to take a stand. You have a chance to really make a difference. Push the envelope and stand up to the industry that wishes to consume us and destroy our quality of life. And if anybody had read the paper, you would know that Boulder County extended their moratorium an additional 6 months because they are very concerned about the health effects, the effects on the roads and so forth. And I think that we would really heed, their wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Barbara Fernandez, followed by Mark White.
Mayor Coombs and members of council, I'm Barbara Fernandez, 1917 Garden Wall Way. I've appeared in front of you many times. Today I have written remarks because it's so emotional. I have to tell you, I've stopped coming because it makes me so sick to come here. But thank you so much for allowing us to speak once again on this very important subject. I appreciate the time and effort expended so far by the various city commission members, its staff, and the council on this topic. But these draft rules do not protect the citizens of Longmont or our public places, our open space, parks, our golf courses. There have been recent newspaper articles stating that natural gas prices have decreased, which means that the oil and gas companies do not need to rush to drill. In fact, the newspapers have said that Anadarko and other companies are not pursuing some of their leases. So it seems to me that we have time to get this right and to protect ourselves and our city. Yesterday afternoon, I attended the commissioners' meeting, Boulder County Commissioners' meeting, when it directed its staff to conduct substantial research in air, water, a transportation impact fee. What about our roads? And the list goes on and on. More importantly, they realized that it will take time to research, gather info, hire consultants, and go through the process of revising the plan. They extended the moratorium. Should we not work together with the county? It seems to me the regulations within the county should be seamless. I had always thought that it was safer to live within incorporated areas of the county because of the power of home rule cities when it comes to zoning. Now it appears that our unincorporated neighbors may be better served. As citizens, we have been very vocal about these issues, and I'm sure many of you think we are obnoxious. But we have invested time and money into this community to make it as what today and to continue to work for its betterment. These draft rules make me sick when it comes to the open pit issues and all the other ways that they have been weakened. I know you feel that your hands may be tied by the state, but you and I should then be working hard to get state laws changed. I've been attending state meetings, testifying. I haven't seen any of you or any representative of Longmont testify in front of the state. Every day I worry that I made a bad choice of choosing to live in Longmont. Who will we sell our houses to after all these news articles? Once the drilling starts and the pollution occurs, we might as well have burned our real estate dollars. What will Longmont look like as the residents abandon their houses to live in communities where their representatives want to protect them? Be brave and act in the best interests of your citizens. These rules are very, very weak. Take the time to start again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark White, followed by Gene Ditzler.
Mayor Coons, City Council. I was also at the Boulder County Commissioners meeting. Noticeably
Could you
absent,
state your name and address first?
1917 Garden Wall Way.
All right.
Noticeably absent was COGA and COGC lawyer. As a matter of fact, I noticed there was no legal threats. No threats of lawsuit. I wonder why. They too went for extending the 6-month moratorium to February 4th. Were you aware that according to COGC's rules, that a driller can spill over up to 275 gallons worth of whatever and not report it? Anything below 5 barrels does not have to be reported. That's like taking a row of 13 cars, puncturing their gas tanks and walking away and not saying a word, not one word, not reporting it to anybody. And it goes into the soil and it stays there. If you notice, there's a spill out by Union Reservoir, recorded in a Times Call today. Benzene, more than the state allowable amount. From my experience, you have to go to the COGCC and push them and push them and push them and push them. That's exactly what happened with Ryder Well 1. The developer had to send someone down to the COGC every 10 days, not to ask, to demand something be done. That's what we're dealing with. That is exactly what we're dealing with. Do you want that? Colorado has had booms and busts. The last real boom was the mining in the 1800s, and I believe we're still dealing with those mistakes. We're still dealing with that. Now, do we just want to rush into allowing drilling, allowing benzene, and allowing the oil companies just to pick up? Oh, we're done here. We've got our stuff. We're just going to take off. Oh, by the way, we're sorry about this spill. We're sorry about your roads. We're sorry about this. We're sorry about that. Maybe you can have a tax increase. Maybe you can repair it. We'll see you. Bye. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Gene Ditzler, followed by Michael Kokoli.
Hi, Jean Ditzler, 1541 Tucker Drive. Many in the community have asked for an umbrella to protect us from the oncoming storm of oil and gas drilling about to descend upon our town. What the city has constructed with these draft regulations is more like a sieve. This document, full of wishes and hopes, is full of holes and will leave the citizens of Longmont, our parks, our schools, our homes soaked in the coming deluge. But between the holes, there's a possibility that might hold up, only because it is the one area that doesn't seem to have been tested in court, and that is zoning and land use. I applaud the city for finding the chink in the preemption armor and beginning to write some legislation that capitalizes on it. It makes sense that we as a home rule city have a right to determine the character of our city through zoning and land use, that we have a right to say industrial operations like oil and gas facilities do not belong in residential areas because it is truly of local concern. However, I think the city can go further. I think the city can apply this to other areas where these facilities do not belong, particularly public zoning areas. Public areas are zoned as such because they are for public use. Tell me how oil and gas companies alone among businesses who do not serve a publicly accessible function should be allowed what amounts to permanent access and use of public zone property, especially when that access so permanently changes the nature of the land on which it occurs. I ask that the City Council please consider adding public zoned areas to this list of excluded areas. I would further argue that in all actuality, all oil and gas operations should be confined to general industrial zones. These zones are defined as for general industry, manufacturing, storage, and related activities that typically require separation or isolation from other types of land uses or need extensive outdoor storage or activity areas. You are already likely to be fighting the concept of restricting oil and gas operations to specific zones. It matters little what those zones are in regards to the legality of the issue. So you might as well make that regulation meaningful as long as you're going to be spending the energy and money to fight for it. In regards to setbacks, I'm disappointed that setbacks have been relegated to a wish list requirement. However, I find it even odder that if it is to be so, they haven't been made to be at least 1,500 feet. Which is less than what community input overwhelmingly supported when you asked for it. At this point, why not ask for what will protect citizens? It seems of little difference what that number is as to the legality of it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Gene. Michael Kokoli, followed by Chris Porzuchek.
Hi there, I'm Mike Kokoli from 420 North Parkside Drive in Longmont. I hope you don't mind if I change the subject. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and the City Council and all of the city staff for the great job you've been doing running the city. Everything looks great. Everything's well planned and well maintained, and everything seems to be running smoothly. Thank you for offering the young military veterans and the active duty personnel the welcome home gift of a 90-day free pass to the Longmont rec facilities. A handful of veterans have accepted the gift, and the rest of us, which are probably at least 1,000, appreciate the heart and soul and generosity that made the gift possible. Louisville has followed your excellent example, and Boulder and Lafayette are working. It's taken them several months, but they're working on a similar program, pushing it through their systems. It only took this city about 20 business days to create and implement this program with Christmas and New Year's in the middle of it. So this city government is awesome, and you have the heart and soul and courage to support diversity and education for disadvantaged people, and the guts to support marriages of various kinds. I really appreciate your efforts, and I think that if any attention or force or anything needs to be pointed at anything, it would be at the governor and at the attorney general. This preemption business is not very well founded at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Chris Porzuchek, followed by Shelley Bassman.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Chris Porzuchek, 12624 Weld County Road 1. Here to talk about the regs in oil and gas. Most of the issues we brought back in December are not resolved with these regulations. They don't protect me, my family, my neighbors. Oil wells are still contaminated. It's just not healthy to put consolidated well pads 350 feet from houses and call it good. Things have changed, technology's changed, and I think the regs need to change with it. Regarding my house, I've been trying to sell it. We get a lot of looks. People like it. You know what the general consensus is? We're not going to invest in a house where there's going to be a bunch of drilling around there. So we're starting to get evidence of property values being altered. Some might say, I'm sure up here, you kind of brought this upon yourself, you brought the awareness, but they would already be back there if I didn't, so I'm comfortable with that. So I tried to solicit Mr. Schumacher, since I think I might be staying there now and for the battle, about what he's going to do for baseline air and water testing, and I haven't heard back. It's been 3 weeks. He passed it on to somebody else, but nobody's contacted me. So here's what my neighbors and I are going to do. We're going to start doing our own baseline testing for air. We're going to start doing our own water samples at Union. We're going to start getting appraisals on all the properties. We're going to get individual toxicology tests. So when things start going bad, we've got proof. And hopefully Longmont won't be on the other side of the table when this all comes down to try and disprove what we're going to find out. Because that's where you're positioning yourselves, folks, by doing what you're doing with the regs that you're doing. You're invested in this, being around the lake. I'd love to see that money invested into some baseline testing rather than a trail around the lake. That'd be more protecting my community than putting a ring around the lake for people to enjoy. I'd much rather see protection for my health. When it comes to auto exhaust versus oil and gas well exhaust, I do believe they do have emissions testing. So if your average person who makes $20,000, $50,000 a year can afford to go get some emission testing, please tell me why a billion-dollar industry can't go get tested. This is very difficult for me and my family, I can assure you. I'm in limbo, don't know where I'm going to move, don't know how I'm going to handle this. So this is kind of the outline of what's going to happen if I'm stuck there. And we're going to start putting these things into work. I'm not going to get rolled over. I can guarantee you that. So hopefully you guys will be on my side of the table. I'd love to sit down and talk with you more. Any one of you, more than welcome to. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Chris. Shelley Bassman.
Good evening, Mayor Coombs, Council. My name is Shelley Bassman, and I live at 3414 Lakeview Circle, where I share the surface rights. I've been thinking, in 1912, which is a bit before my time, Longmont took on the state of Colorado. Then Longmont knew that what was right for Longmont was a municipal utility for electricity, and the state wouldn't allow it, no how. Longmont challenged the attempt of the state preemption of local rule and won. Today, the city of Boulder is trying to follow Longmont's 100-year-old footsteps. Boulder is trying to get out from under Excel's enormous thumbs and have its own municipal electric utility. It's 100 years later. The state is again threatening preemption of Longmont's local home rule. This time, it's the taxpayer-funded, wholly owned subsidiary of the oil and gas corporations, the COGCC, the state attorney, and probably the governor himself, who are terrorizing us and bullying us. So we want to stand up. And the only instance of standing up in these regulations is the prohibition of oil and gas wells in residential zones. I support that strongly. But what happens when TOP applies to the city to change the zoning on the land it owns beside Trail Ridge Road? Does the city, or can the city, have a rule that residential zoning will forever stay residential? I'm really disappointed that prohibiting the city from accepting a drilling permit application for operators or property subject to ongoing, quote, enforcement action was removed. This has nothing to do with enforcement or penalties, which is the self-proclaimed preserve of the COGCC. Ask any parent. It's about logical consequences. Specifically, you don't get permission to make a second mess until you've cleaned up the first one. In TOP's case, there are 3 ongoing messes. One 6 years duration, the other 2 of 1 year duration. How about changing the word enforcement, if that so bothers the COGCC? Call it ongoing remediation requirement. Call it ongoing cleanup requirement. Or call it good parenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Terry McHugh, followed by Renee Cox.
Mayor Combs, City Council, my name is Terry McHugh. I live at 2185 Hackberry Circle. I resided in Longmont for over 30 years. Tonight I had to come down, amongst other things, to pay my sales tax, and I really just had to stop in. I've never, ever seen a city council less responsive to the citizenry on any subject as what this city council is showing now. Shirley kind of stole my thunder. I was going to mention 100 years ago that a city council took great courage to stand up to the state and to great powers. And we all are reaping the benefits of that courage these days in having the lowest utility costs and the most reliable and greatest utility company in the state of Colorado, probably in the United States for my money. Last year, the last city council, of which a number of you were members, did the opposite. When they gave in to Firestone and gave in to the most preposterous court ruling from a Weld County district judge that said the city of Longmont had less rights to annex along 119, directly contiguous to the city limits of Longmont, and therefore annex property that the city owned. And this judge said that a town whose nearest city border was 6 miles away had more rights to annex than we did. That was preposterous and cowardly to give up the sacrosanct idea of having Longmont as a standalone city with significant buffers. The only reason we haven't seen the results of that cowardice is because the economy hasn't recovered yet. When the economy recovers, the eastern border of Longmont will forever be just like the rest of the borders in Metro Denver. You can't tell the difference when you go from Thornton to Westminster unless you happen to see the sign. You can't tell the difference going from anywhere in Denver to Adams County. It's all one big maze, and the eastern corridor of our city was given up by the last city council. It takes courage to do the right thing. And you can't tell me that industrial applications within 150 feet of schools and residences, you tell me that that's something that's just so legally defensible and so obvious that we have to lay down and give in to it? It's time to strap on a pair and get some courage, ladies and gentlemen.
Renee Cox, followed by Bob Winkler.
I'm Renee Cox, and I presently reside at 2029 Meadow Drive, number 3. And I'd like to thank you tonight for hearing us once again on this issue. I must apologize because I did not have a prepared statement. I did have a prepared statement a couple of months back when you issued the moratorium, and I addressed several points as far as the water quality, the air quality, your property values. I grew up in Old Country. In the west, mid-dark old derricks, friendly flares to view. The friendly flares, they were the burning off of the methane that was extra. I remember seeing that on the horizon that I looked at. We took great pride of being the oil capital of the world, although we were like 3 miles from the West Texas border. And I can assure you, I have been a recipient and a victim of the boom and bust of the oil industry. As a Girl Scout, young, I made a pledge that on my honor I will try to serve God, my country, and mankind. Just now we said the pledge with my hand over my heart. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The oil and gas industry is not looking at the liberty and justice of this community. I have friends that have ostracized me for saying what I spoke about the last time I was here. Their livelihood still depends on the oil and gas industry. Although I've seen the boom and bust, I do know the property values do drop. And I was just talking to a gentleman today that is for fracking, probably has wells on his property. He's also for GMOs, and he made the comment, well, they'll be gone in 10 years. They will be. But if you look at the roads in North Dakota now, they've already stated that they can't even survive the infrastructure at this point because the roads are crumbling due to the traffic. They don't have anywhere to house their residents due to the influx of the employees that are coming in. Longmont set a precedent here lately of I'm hearing all over of how proud people are of Longmont. You've got a music scene. You've got an art scene. They've seen changes with what you've done with your community. And tonight I had a choice of going to Boulder and listening to bee gardening, or to maybe come here and talk about this, and my heart wouldn't allow me to go to Boulder. 1,000-foot setback almost seems too little to me. I don't think you realize with open pit what that looks like, what it smells like. So I urge you to issue another moratorium, if you will, to maybe take a harder look at the facts of what this means, how your property values will go down, and then just the smells alone. We're in a major wildlife corridor here. Our water is a precious resource. They may be saying it's a minute amount of water that we're using, but we're at the gateway to Nation's Playground, and I don't believe that you're going to increase your tourist industry with oil wells. So thank you for listening this evening.
Thank you, Renee. Bob Winkler, followed by Michael Belmont.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I live in Greeley, Colorado. I'm here in solidarity for the people in this community because of the fact that no one will even listen to me in Weld County, much less Greeley. It sickens me to hear all these individuals here and all the things that are going on, and it just makes me wonder if any of you have any hearts or feelings about the people in your community. I've been working on this for over a year and trying to push this agenda to our city council and our county commissioners, and they just do not want to hear it. I'm here to maybe do some good and hear about what these people are going through and maybe a semblance of hope that you as a city council will listen to your community and the people that live here and want to raise their families here. As I said, it sickens me that our elected officials care little, if not any, for the citizens. I listen to all these stories, and I can't believe that you wouldn't want to be hearing what they're saying and how they're concerned. And would you want to have an open pit next to your house? Actually, I moved to here about a year ago from Wisconsin to a state or county that I thought was an environmentally sensitive county. And when the well started a half a block from my house and people couldn't sleep for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, working people, it made me sick. I called the state agency, I called the police, I called everyone. No one cares because it's all been figured out already. No one gives a damn about anybody. If the oil and gas industry are here to make money, and they could care less about the people in this community. And I just hope you listen to these people because they're the ones that put you in office, and they're the ones that can take you out of office as well. Another thing I want to mention, which I don't understand, is I've been in risk assessment for 40 years, and I don't understand why no one's doing any kind of risk assessment or looking at health hazards of what's going to be happening in the next 10 or 15 years as people start developing cancer and all kinds of diseases from this irresponsible industry that's out there that I don't know why they can't be under the same legal law, or the same laws that other industries are under, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Act. Why can't they be under those same laws that they have out there? Obviously, I'm pretty worked up about this, and that's all I really have to say. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Michael Belmont, followed by Joe Bassman.
Michael Belmont, I live at 841 Tenacity Drive in Longmont. Had no prepared remarks, but as I listened, I put together some notes on my computer. I've often thought of where I would have cast my lot during the campaign to free slaves in the 19th century, campaign for women's suffrage in the early 20th century, the campaign for the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And I can't help but think of the tens of thousands that either opposed those reforms while the movements were happening, stood by indifferently, or acquiesced and obeyed to the laws and regulations that would soon be proven and recognized to be inappropriate, unconstitutional, unethical, inhumane, negating human rights and indeed even human health. All of those laws, enslaving and abusing humans, considering the legal status of women to be chattel or property, marginalizing a race that helped build this nation. We are at a precarious juncture where a heavy industry, fracking, is rapidly encroaching upon our cities to be implemented adjacent to our schools, our homes, our open spaces, without truly understanding the extent of the health hazards. Every week, every day, every month, new information is being released. As an example, I was at the county commissioners yesterday, and the young woman who presented for the Air Quality Board to them quoted from the Science of the Total Environment Journal, which is a peer-reviewed international scientific journal that's been around, that's sponsored by a 130-year-old publisher that serves 20 million scientists in terms of information for them. They determined that within a half mile, if you lived a half mile of a fracking activity, particularly in the completion process, you were 250% more likely to have chronic health impacts. You were 60% more likely to have cancer. This is a study that may well be proven soon. It may be some time, however, before we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that fracking is safe. If, as it would appear with the emerging evidence, the science eventually proves that you were wrong to allow this activity in our precious city, and the laws and regs are ultimately changed to reflect the rights of the citizens who may now be damaged irreversibly, how do you want to be remembered in terms of where you cast your lot when we had a chance to make a difference? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Joe Bassman, followed by Strider Benston.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. City Manager, Mr. City Attorney. I'm Joe Bassman. I live at 3414 Lakeview Circle, and I would just like to bring you some information I've seen in written material during the past week that perhaps we can get increased setbacks from the COGCC. After all, there's a stakeholders group that is convening right now. I attended the first meeting of the stakeholders group. It's not by invitation. Anyone who can breathe can walk in and sit down. Most of those people were oil and gas people, and I was in their company. The meeting was started out by I think Mr. Neslin spoke, and he made the statement that we don't see any need for change, and that basically he was saying not much is going to come out of this proceeding. In particular, the most substantial piece of evidence that they speak about evidence, is this sheet of paper. And this sheet of paper, in fact, I'll read from it, and I'll ask for you to form your own conclusion as I read the bottom line of the statement. Out of 5,000 wells that were investigated between December 2008 and February 2012, out of 5,000, 3,700 are set back 1,000 feet or more from a building. For the same 5,000 wells, 4,600 are set back 500 feet or more. 500 are 5,000 feet or less. That's 10%. In other words, 90% have setbacks greater than 500 feet. Now, I'm not sure what your conclusion is. The COGCC wants us to conclude that larger setbacks are not needed and are irrelevant because 90% of all wells are already set back 500 feet or more. Now, here's a different perspective. What's the big deal? If 90% already comply with 500 feet setbacks, then why not allow that distance to be codified into law? So what's your conclusion? My conclusion is that the COGCC knows damn well that larger setbacks are good for humans and for the environment, and that's why they're talking about this topic. I consider this document to be insulting. They're trying to convince us that it's fun to be 350 feet from a well. Instead, they want us to believe that there's no need for us to worry. We can trust the oil and gas companies to take away our health and property values for only 10% of us, and maybe a bit more, a higher percentage in the city. So I ask you in particular to maintain a few of the remaining protections that we have in our draft regulations. Help us level the playing field. First of all, use zoning to protect all residential zones in Longmont. There are numerous of them, and the draft regulations are very indefinite about that. List all residential zones. Secondly, simply add the public zone. This will protect many parks and golf courses and other areas within the city. Also, regarding industrial zones, we have 3 industrial zones, specify general industrial zones, and only those may be violated by the oil companies for dumping their toxic wastes. And always, always instruct staff to oppose toxic dumps in our city. Please do not yield to threats from the State Attorney General. Use every means available to defend our rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Strider Benston, followed by Kim Gibbs.
Strider Benston, 951 17th Avenue. I agree with everything that has been said tonight, especially Michael, who broadened the issue, and Joan, who told you what the law is and what you're sworn to uphold. I found a book 200 years ago, some thoughts, because there are many factors going on, and I want to go into another piece of it. Eternal spirit of the chainless mind, brightest in dungeons, liberty thou art, for there thy habitation is the heart which love of thee alone can bind. And when thy sons to fetters are confined, to fetters and to damp vaults' dayless gloom, their country conquers with their martyrdom, and freedom's fame finds wings on every wind. Angola, thy prison is a holy place, and thy sad floor an altar, for 'twas trod until their very steps have left a trace, worn as if thy cold pavement were a sod by Wallace and Fox, as if thy cold pavement were a sod. Many may none those marks efface, for they appeal from tyranny to God. Our bread was such as captives' tears have moistened many 1,000 years since man first pent his fellow men like brutes within an iron den. It might be months or years or days. I kept no count, I took no note. I had no hope my eyes to raise and clear them of their dreary moat. My very chains and I grew friends. So much along communion tends to make us what we are. Today, Harold Wallace and Albert Wood Fox have been confined in a 6 by 9 foot box for 30 years. What was their crime? They were members of the Black Panther Party, and they organized in Angola prison for humane conditions and for the right to read books, and against rape and torture. And for that crime, they have been in a 6 by 9 foot box for 40 years, 14,600 days of torture. Now, there is a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, who have been pushing these kind of laws for 40 years also. We now have 2.5 million prisons in America. Corporate impunity is what we're dealing with here in Longmont. That is the only step between us, a democracy, and corporate dictatorship, which a man named Mussolini named fascism. It's the same game. ALEC also pushed the Kill First law that you see manifest in Florida. They also pushed the takeover of Michigan and the anti-labor regulations in Wisconsin. Let's wake up and see what's going on and reaffirm democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Strider. Kim Gibbs.
Do we need a little break? Good evening, Mayor Coombs and members of the council. My name is Kim Gibbs. I live at 7468 Mount Sherman Road. I'd like to comment on fracking by sharing my personal experience with heavy industry and air pollution. Several years ago in the mid-1990s, I moved to Utah to pursue high adventure. And to pay the bills, I took a job in Provo, about 30 miles south of Salt Lake City, and I lived in American Fork. Shortly after moving there, I began to notice black plumes of smoke billowing from nearby Geneva Steel, an integrated steel mill that was built during World War II. The stench was sickening, and I can still remember the metallic taste that was always in the back of my mouth. So I called Geneva and asked about their emissions, and the company rep, or the propaganda manager, as I called him, told me that they were completely within the law and that the pollution was really coming from cars. I was not convinced. I continued to research, and I learned that the smoke contained many harmful chemicals, including heavy metals such as mercury and lead and benzenes and all kinds of other things. When I contacted the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, they confirmed that Geneva was operating generally within their permit. I continued to research, and I learned about a study conducted by BYU professor Dr. C. Arden Pope. His research was summarized in a paper titled Respiratory Disease Associated with Community Air Pollution and a Steel Mill, Utah Valley. Dr. Pope's scientific research showed a clear and convincing link between Geneva Steel's particulate pollution and respiratory disease in Utah Valley. While this study was praised by environmental groups, critics labeled it as shaky science and devoted much effort and money to discredit Dr. Pope's work. By the end, Dr. Pope's landmark study withstood intense scrutiny and was used to justify tighter EPA restrictions on particulate emissions. The study provided data and analysis to support what any reasonable person already knew. Foul-smelling air that makes you sick is not healthy to breathe. Without a doubt, Geneva Steel knowingly caused death and poor health in the Utah Valley. Their actions were unconscionable. Now, I realize that a steel mill is different from an oil well, but there are also important similarities. Government regulations often are not sufficient to protect public health. I urge you to do your part to ensure that the oil and gas industry bears the full burden of proving their processes are safe. And regarding the oil and gas regulations, please try again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Elise Champy. Followed by Nicole Jones.
Elise Champ, 828 Tenacity Drive, Longmont. No fracking, please.
Nicole Jones. Followed by Jeff Thompson.
Hi, Nicole Jones, 905 Little Leaf Court. Currently, we are actively seeking to move employment out of state. After you decided to not extend the moratorium, we decided we don't want to be here anymore. But we're still here, and we still own a home. So I'm here to talk. Because actually I wasn't planning on it, but my 6-year-old son at dinner tonight, I said, you know, there's this meeting tonight, and they're talking about the wells in Longmont and if it's going to happen here. Because my kids, they count them as they're driving up the interstate. Mommy, there's a well. Mommy, there's a well. Could that be by our school someday? Well, you know what? Yeah, it could if we live in Longmont. So he's like, I think you should go talk to them because maybe you could change their mind. I said I could try. So I'm pretty off the cuff, and I'm just going to talk about what I've heard here tonight. There's been a reoccurring theme about courage. The Boulder County Commissioners, I think they've shown courage. They extended their moratorium. They listened to their people. Unfortunately, the City Council, I'm seeing cowardice and some smugness and some disrespect to your constituents. I want an extended moratorium. I don't think that's up for debate, but that's what I want. Ultimately, I want a ban. I don't want natural gas. I want people to focus on renewables. Natural gas is an unsustainable process. It's not going to last this long haul. It's bad for the environment. It's just all around just unsustainable. And I think somewhere on your website you talk about how Longmont is a sustainable community. It doesn't add up for me. But since this probably will not happen, will there be a ban or a moratorium, I would hope that you would consider keeping this as far away from our schools, our parks, and our homes as possible. 1,500 feet people are asking for. For me, that's not far enough. A half a mile is what they say is sketchy with the health consequences. So please, when you're looking at your regulations, consider as far away as possible. Don't be a robot for the oil and gas industry. be courageous. Thank you.
Jeff Thompson, followed by David Poster.
Jeff Thompson, 1616 Sumner Street. I just came down here tonight because I'm kind of interested in all this controversy that we've been reading about it in the newspapers, and some of the people here have been talking about how much water it takes for fracking. And I just came across an article that absolutely infuriated me. It was in the Fort Collins Coloradan on March 12th this year. And they were talking about some of the cities in this area that lease their water to the oil companies and what they're getting for their water. Greeley is getting $1,062 per acre foot. Fort Lupton is getting $1,430 per acre foot. I hope somebody's writing this down. You know what Longmont's getting? $75 per acre foot. This could not be happening if our water utility were not corrupt. That $75 does not cover the pumping cost. And there's two members on this city council who were on the city council member a year ago when our lease with Central Colorado Water Conservation District was before the city council, and I told you that that $75 an acre foot would not cover the pumping cost. And they went ahead and voted to approve that lease. The people that are here, most of the people speaking, don't understand what's going on in this city. That every time they pay their water bills, they are paying money that goes to the oil companies. So the oil company, we're basically providing the water supply at our expense, and then providing the water at less than it costs us to the oil companies, so then they can use that water and come back and frack us. And there's no doubt in my mind that Council Members Witt and Samori knows what's going on. And some of these people come up here and they say, gee, the city council doesn't have any courage. I bet you Council Member Bagley knows what's going on also. They say the city council doesn't have any courage. This city council has incredible courage, because this city council knows that they're sitting there presiding over a corrupt city, a corrupt water utility, and they're doing nothing and saying nothing for the benefit of the oil companies that bought their seats on the city council.
Time's up. Thank you, Jeff. David Pilster.
Good evening, Mayor Coombs, fellow city council members. My name is David Pelster, 1574 Cossack Drive. First thing I wanted to note, if Boulder County ends up banning fracking and oil and gas exploration, we become an island of oil and gas exploration. Do we want that? The second thing I wanted to note, I was wondering, Councilmember Bagley, if you, from my ward, would represent Longmont at the setback stakeholder meeting now that the task force is over. I'd really appreciate that. Thought you did a good job representing Longmont at the task force meeting. For the remaining of my public invite to be heard, I wanted to read a publication published March 19th, 2012. Study shows air emissions near fracking sites may have serious health impacts. In a new study, researchers from the Colorado School of Public Health have shown that air pollution caused by hydraulic fracturing contribute to acute and chronic health problems for those living near natural gas drilling sites. Thank you so much for keeping in the current draft residential ban for oil and gas regulations, although I don't think it saves Trail Ridge because Top Operating owns that land. It's inevitable that land will get rezoned. Quote, our data shows that it's important to include air pollution in the national dialogue on natural gas development that has focused largely on water exposures to hydraulic fracturing, said Lisa McKenzie, PhD, MPH, lead author of the study and research associate of the Colorado School of Public Health. The study will be published in an upcoming edition of Science and Total Environment. The report, based on 3 years of monitoring, found a member of the potentially toxic petroleum hydrocarbons in the air near their wells, including benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, xylene, BTEX. Benzene has been identified by the Environmental Protection Agency as a known carcinogen. Our results show, quote, that the non-cancer health impacts from air emissions due to natural gas development is greater for residents living closer to wells. That's me. That's my family. That's my 5-year-old, my 3-year-old, my 10-month-old. The report said, end quote. Begin quote. The greatest health impact corresponds to the relatively short-term but high emission well completion period. I'll make sure that I am far away as possible during the completion period. Please make sure that the regulations include notification to all families when the completion period is going to begin. That's due to, am I done?
Got another minute.
That's due to exposure to trimethylbenzenes, allopathic hydrocarbons, and xylenes, all of which have neurological and/or respiratory effects. And studies said those effects could include eye irritation, headache, sore throat, and difficulty breathing. I have asthma. So does my 5-year-old. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come address the council at this time? I will close the public invited to be heard. You got one? Okay. Please state your name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Kieran Oliver. I live on 514 Gay Street. I just wanted to say it's kind of my generation that's really going to get affected by fracking, and so I think the onus really should be on you guys to make sure that you do it responsibly. And I'm kind of in favor of fracking. I know we need the energy, and it is, I know one of the ladies was talking about renewables, and it's a good staging point to really get to the new renewables for the next couple of years, but we really need to take the time and do it effectively and do it responsibly so that in the future we're not affected by it. So anyway, that's all I had to say.
Thank you. I will now close the public invited to be heard. Let's take a 10-minute break. Can we call the meeting back to order, please? Yep. Next, we have a proclamation. Excuse me, can we come to order, please? Thank you. Next, we have a proclamation designating April 21st, 2012 as Arbor Day in Longmont. Proclamation designating April 21st, 2012 as Arbor Day in Longmont, Colorado, whereas the citizens of Longmont recognize that trees significantly contribute to enhancing our quality of life, and whereas Arbor Day aims to foster community stewardship among individuals, neighborhood associates, schools, nonprofits, businesses, and the city through planting trees, and whereas Longmont supports the Million Tree Planting Initiative called Tree by Tree, the Metro Million, and whereas our community focus is committed to improving the environment for future generations. Now, therefore, I, Dennis L. Coombs, Mayor by virtue of the authority vested in me and the City Council of the City of Longmont, do hereby proclaim April 21st, 2012 as Arbor Day in Longmont, and I invite all citizens in the community to celebrate the importance of trees now and year-round. Go ahead and give your presentation, or
thank you, Mayor Coombs. Ken Wickland with the Forestry Division here in Longmont, and just a quick history lesson. Okay, the very first Arbor Day was in 1872, and it was started by an individual named Julius Sterling Morton, happened in Nebraska of all places, and he made an amazing statement on the very first Arbor Day. He says, "Most holidays reflect upon the past. Arbor Day reflects on the future." And, you know, that statement was 140 years ago. And then here today we're finding out that trees are an amazing part of environmental issues, both locally and both globally. So it's a worldwide celebration now. And here in Longmont, we are having Our Arbor Day celebration to recognize the importance of trees, and it's a public invited event. And it's going to be, of course, we'll plant a tree. We have a tree sale. Thanks to Platte River Power Authority, we can sell trees below our cost that we purchase them for. And we have music, food, games, activities, lots of fun. And we incorporated that now with Earth Day. So we are now able to bring more of an educational component too. So it's a great family event, great fun day, lots to do, and it's going to be this Saturday, April 21st, 11 to 3 at Thompson Park. So public's invited, and appreciate you being out there.
Thank you, Ken. Come forward now.
That's your job. You
After the presentation.
Yeah.
Don, will you introduce the next study session item?
Sure, Mayor. The first item on the agenda tonight is an update on the new Excel gas franchise agreement. Jim Golden, Director of Finance, will present the item.
Thank you.
Mayor Kumis, Member of Council, I'm Jim Golden, Director of Finance Support Services, and I'm part of a team of staff from 3 different departments in the City Attorney's Office that have been working on the matter of the renewal of the gas franchise agreement with Excel. Tonight with me here are Nick Wolfram, the Engineering Manager from Public Works Natural Resources, Ann Lutz from Longmont Power and Communications, and Jeff Friedland from the City Attorney's Office. Also, Craig Eicher from Excel is also here tonight in the audience, and Craig's part of the team from Excel that's been working with us on the negotiation of the franchise agreement. The city approved its current 20-year franchise agreement with Excel in November of '93, and so that expires on November 2nd of 2013. And the charter states that no franchise shall be granted except upon the affirmative vote of a majority of the qualified electors voting thereon. This also requires that the council establish the terms of the franchise by ordinance. So the council has to approve a new franchise agreement by ordinance and submit it to a vote of the city electors. And because election day in 2013 is November 5th of 2013, 3 days after the current franchise is scheduled to expire, so therefore we anticipate taking this to a vote in November of this year, 2012. So in preparation for our negotiations with Excel, we began meeting internally on this matter about a year ago so that we could review the current franchise and identify the issues and the things such as the amount of the franchise fee, the scope of the franchise that's granted to Excel, and coordination of work with the city. Staff met with some other cities that had recently concluded negotiations with Excel on new franchises to better understand how their process went and what issues they may have had that might have been contentious. Excuse me. In addition to providing an obvious critical service, the franchise agreement is an important source of revenue for the city. The franchise fee in our existing agreement is 3%, as is the standard franchise fee for Excel statewide. The amount of revenue from this source varies from year to year in relationship to Excel's gas revenues. Last year it was almost $755,000. So based upon our internal review and discussions with other municipalities, staff concluded that hiring special counsel with expertise in gas franchise negotiations would be in the city's best interests. We issued an RFP for outside counsel, and the law firm of Kissinger and Feldman was selected and approved by the City Council last July. Our first negotiation meeting with Excel was in February of this year. We've had several negotiation sessions since that time, and we do expect to still have several more before finalizing a draft franchise agreement to present to the council for consideration. Because again, this is driven by election day in 2012, we anticipate having to follow the following schedule that I outlined in your communication. In July, we will present the franchise agreement to council at a study session for review of the draft. By the first week of August, the draft franchise agreement must be finalized. August 14th would be the first reading of an ordinance approving the agreement and submitting it to the electors. Second reading on August 28th. September 7th of this year is the last day for the clerk to certify the ballot to the county clerk, and then election day is on November 6th of this year. So we're going to continue to meet, negotiate with Excel, and the next step will be returning to you in about 3 months with the draft agreement for consideration. Not looking for any specific direction tonight. We just wanted to check in with you, let you know the current status and the actions that will be required of you later this year. So that's the extent of my presentation. Any questions that myself or other team members can answer for you on the matter?
Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Is this agreement substantially different than the last one?
Mayor Coombs, members of council, we are still negotiating it, so there have been some changes. I think there's certainly some of that may be considered of substance, but at this point in time, we haven't resolved most of the major matters. So I don't think we could fully answer that question right now. But we will
Okay,
certainly.
so the one we have in our packet is the old one?
Oh yeah, that's correct. This is the one in effect now. You won't see a draft agreement until June, and we'll point out the changes of substance.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So thank you, Jim. Thank you. Don, will you introduce the next item?
Sure thing. Mayor, the next item on the agenda are draft oil and gas regulations. Brian Schumacher, planner, will present the item.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Brian Schumacher with Economic Development. So I'm here to provide council with an overview. Since the last discussion that we had with council in February on the draft oil and gas regulations that have been revised as version 2 in your packet. And based on the prior review of council on February 21st and subsequent analysis, staff is requesting council's direction with respect to the oil and gas regulations on whether or not you'd like us to proceed with introduction of an ordinance in May. So the intent of the presentation is not to be too long, as to provide a brief overview of areas of change and then also areas of no change in the draft regulations. The primary intent with respect to the draft regulations is to balance the city's desire to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the city and the surrounding areas, as well as the wildlife and environment, through the local land use authority, while taking into consideration state legislation and rules and court rulings on state preemption regarding oil and gas operations. So with that, I'm going to move on to the slide presentation. So as we've discussed before, I'm not going to go into this in great detail because council has been provided quite a bit of background information with respect to local regulation and the areas and issues associated with preemption. But they've been categorized into 3 primary areas. One is areas that are preempted by prior court rulings. Those are the red light areas. Areas that are not currently preempted or considered to be preempted, those are the green light areas. And then also areas where there has not been a ruling regarding preemption, and those are kind of the gray or yellow light areas. With respect to some of the red light areas, I'm going to touch upon this briefly. Again, setbacks is an area that has been preempted based on prior court rulings, the Town of Frederick case. And in the initial draft, we had a minimum and a recommended standard. The minimum was 350 feet or more, And that's what's in our current regulations. The recommended standard was 750 feet or more. Based upon our analysis, we are, in the latest draft, we have changed that to remove the minimum standard, and which would default to the COGCC or state rules with respect to the statewide standard of 150 feet or more, or in high density areas, 350 foot or more standard for setbacks from occupied structures or building units as they're referred to in the state rules. This version, the current draft, retains the recommended standard of 750 feet on setbacks. So what we'd anticipate is that if there were an application submitted that did not comply with at least the recommended standard, that through the LGD process, staff would try to work with the operator and the COGCC to locate facilities far away as possible from homes and schools and other impacted facilities to try to mitigate impacts to the maximum extent practical. As noted, there is also a state stakeholders process regarding setbacks that's currently underway. It was initiated in February, and it was put on hold temporarily while the governor's task force process was going through its steps, and it was recently concluded. And that stakeholders process is scheduled to start up again this week on Thursday. And based upon conversations that we've had with the state staff, they anticipate having meetings every other week with the stakeholders group to look at a variety of different issues related to setback issues and to make a determination on whether or not there should be consideration regarding rule changes to the current state setback requirements. Looking at some of the other red light areas, the areas that are currently in the draft, regarding financial requirements, those have been retained as a recommended standard. The noise abatement standards, again, those are also retained as a recommended standard. And the visual impact mitigation, that language has been retained on a case-by-case determination to decide whether or not visual mitigation is necessary or not. Again, regarding some of the green light areas where local land use authority is determined not to be a preemptive issue. One of the areas that we've added some requirements is regarding for new development and setbacks of new development from existing and abandoned well sites. And you'll notice in there the setback requirement is consistent with the recommended setback of new wells from occupied structures, for example, the 750-foot requirement. You'll also notice on page 55, lines 45 and 46, there's a couple of X's regarding the setback standard from abandoned wells. We've been doing some research on there. There hasn't been a lot of information or details with respect to other jurisdictions' setback requirements. So we're continuing to do that research, and we'll have that information prior to first reading of an ordinance, if so directed by council. Other green light areas that we've retained in the standards are listed on here. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to respond to those. And then there's the yellow light or gray areas where there have not been court rulings with respect to particular areas of regulation. And I'm going to run through some of the specific areas where changes have been made, and then we have a summary slide showing areas where we're not proposing any language changes in this version 2 of the draft. So with respect to zoning restrictions, the initial draft included a prohibition regarding oil and gas facilities, surface facilities in residential zoning districts, and mixed use and planned unit development and mixed use zoning districts that include residential development. The current draft does not include any changes to that particular restriction. And then we've also added in, as I'll note in the next slide or two, about the added in oil and gas waste disposal facilities are included as heavy industrial uses with zoning restrictions that apply to those heavy industrial uses. So if council does direct staff to proceed with an ordinance, we would clarify in the ordinance specifically those zoning districts where oil and gas facilities would or would not be allowed in the table of permitted uses in our use regulations. The next item is regarding use prohibitions. The initial draft included prohibitions regarding several types of oil and gas waste disposal facilities, as well as temporary housing on site for oil and gas operations. And in the current draft, we've removed the prohibition on the above items regarding the oil and gas waste disposal facilities, and included or left in the temporary housing. And by removing the prohibition, then we've made the change to classify these oil and gas waste disposal facilities as heavy industrial uses, subject to those heavy industrial standards and limitations to industrial zoning district. Based upon the fact that the state issues permits for these types of facilities, it's likely that the local government would be preempted from prohibiting them outright in the community. So the intent was to restrict them to areas or zoning districts where we felt that they were appropriate to classify as in a heavy industrial area. So again, as I mentioned in the under the setbacks discussion, if a permit were proposed by the state or at the state level by an operator, that we would request that the state would not approve such a permit for a oil and gas waste disposal facility in the community, just because we feel that that's not appropriate in an urbanizing area based on the potential impacts. Next area is regarding enforcement and penalties. The initial draft included language prohibiting the processing or approval of permit applications for operators or properties subject to ongoing enforcement action. This was removed from the current draft based upon our concern that the enforcement authority is vested with the state and the COGCC, and that the local land use authority in this area is likely preempted.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Can I just ask a question on the previous slide?
This slide?
That one, right there, right there. So I'm just curious, so we took it out of the prohibitions, but then it's still under the application process. So what does it mean to not be prohibited, but then it's subject to public hearing review? I mean, how does that play out in real time, real life?
Mayor, Councilmember Bagley. So those particular uses, the oil and gas waste disposal facilities, would be limited to as a heavy industrial use in industrial zoning districts where heavy industrial uses are allowed. But they would be subject to a public hearing conditional use process in those limited industrial districts where they're allowed.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the review process, we had set up this for both an administrative and public hearing process, depending upon whether or not an applicant or operator could meet the minimum versus the recommended standards. So potentially could shorten the review time if an operator were voluntarily willing to agree to meet all of the minimum and recommended standards that are outlined in the draft regulations. Otherwise, if they were not able to meet the recommended standards and could just meet the minimum standards or just some of the recommended standards, then they'd be subject to a public hearing review process as a conditional use review, which would involve a neighborhood meeting and public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and subject to appeal to City Council. So just a note, the conditional use process, public hearing process is our current process that we have in place under our existing regulations. So the current draft does not change the above processes other than adding those oil and gas waste disposal facilities as a required public hearing process in those industrial zoning districts where they might be allowed. So again, just to touch upon the areas with recommended standards, and most of these are those red light areas. We've got setbacks to occupied structures, residential lots, parks, sports fields, playgrounds. Setbacks to water bodies, noise standards, closed loop pitless systems, and financial securities and assurances. Next area is outside activity area. We touched upon this and discussed this at the February 21st council meeting. The initial draft had the Planning and Zoning Commission reviewing, making a determination regarding outside activity areas. We removed this from the current draft, feeling that this is an area that is a discretionary process associated with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and that it would be likely preempted at the local level. One thing I'd like to note is that I know that in the prior comments, I believe at the February 21st meeting, there was a question or concern that the school sites were included in a council communication regarding staff's investigation regarding designation of outside activity areas to the state. If you'll note on the zoning map, most of, if not all of the school sites within the community are currently zoned in residential zoning districts. So thereby, by the prohibition regarding oil and gas facilities in residential zoning districts, that they would not be allowed in school sites. So the other thing I wanted to mention with respect to outside activity areas is that since we are not including this in the draft regulations, or have not included in the latest version, is that we would be making application to the state COGCC for designation of specific areas for as outside activity areas. And we mentioned that in a previous council communication, but some of the areas that we're considering looking at are golf courses, which have a public zoning classification, the soccer fields at Sandstone Ranch, which when the Sandstone Ranch initially went through the outside activity area designation, the soccer fields were completed at that time. So it's just the softball, baseball fields that were designated as outside activity areas. So we'd like to amend that designation to get those soccer fields included as well. The area around Lake McIntosh, which has significant public visitation regarding that trail system, as well as the recreation area by Union Reservoir. So with respect to water supply, the initial draft included requiring the operators to identify a proposed water source and estimated water to be used and evidence of legal entitlement. And that provision has been removed from this draft. A couple things. One, that information was informational only. It wasn't really a regulatory provision regarding restrictions of any type of water use. And we feel that any policy direction that, if given by council, could be given through other means with regard to water supply. Next item is closed loop pitless systems. The initial draft required operators to use closed loop pitless systems and prohibited the use of open pits. The current draft changed that from a minimum requirement to a recommended standard. And since the COGCC permits pits, prohibition, similar to the oil and gas waste disposal facilities, would likely be preempted at the local level. Based upon the information we've heard from the state staff, is that the large majority of recent wells currently utilize closed-loop systems. And again, if a pit were proposed as part of an application through the LGD process, we would request that the COGCC not approve the pit and require a closed-loop system, given that the fact that this is obviously any development in Longmont would be in an urbanizing area. We feel that, again, that it's not appropriate to utilize open pits in or around Longmont. So just in summary on some of the other yellow light areas with no changes in the current draft, there's a list of those other areas: the operational conflict exception review, third-party review and fees, the operation plan, water protection, setback to water bodies, water quality monitoring, stormwater management, wildlife, and habitat protection. Those are all areas where we're not proposing any changes in this current version. So finally, our last slide here, unless council has more specific questions, is that we're currently here on April 17th for council direction on the draft regulations, version 2. If council directs us to come back and introduce an ordinance either as currently drafted or with recommendations that council would like to see us consider or include in the draft that would come back as an ordinance, we anticipate to introduce that on May 8th. And then the public hearing would be scheduled for May 22nd. The effective date of the ordinance would be June 5th, and then the end of moratorium that's currently in effect would be June 16th. So that concludes my remarks. I'll be happy to respond to any questions that council may have.
Could I ask you just a quick question about the pit systems versus the pitless systems? I was actually talking with Commissioner Rademacher, Weld County, yesterday, and he was telling me that the industry standard is everybody's using closed loop. In the last 2 years, he's not aware of any systems using pits in Weld County. So why would that be a big thing to challenge if no one's using it anyway? I don't understand what our big risk is. I mean, maybe it's a moot point if no one's using it anyway, but it just seems like it's kind of silly not to challenge something that's kind of outdated because of technology now. What's your take on that?
Well, Mayor, I think your discussion with Commissioner Rademacher is correct. And what we've heard anecdotally from the state is that in Weld County, I believe at least 90% of the new wells that are being drilled utilize the closed loop system. But since the state does still issue permits for open pits, that we feel that it's a potentially preempted area. I don't know, Eugene, if you want to weigh in any more on that.
Sure, Mayor, Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. Based upon the case law, which is Town of Greeley, where that municipality tried to ban oil and gas development, the court struck that down as preempted, and then there's another mining case, Colorado Mining Association from Summit County, where the county tried to ban heat leach mining technology, and that was also struck down as preempted. And from those two cases, I gather that when a municipality or a local government tries to ban something that the state permits, that is preempted. And as you say, it could be a moot point. I don't see this being a good litigation risk. If we're going to get closed loop systems anyway, why expose the city to that liability?
Councilmember Witt.
I was wondering, how do our proposed regulations compare to, say, Greeley's?
Mayor and Councilmember Witt, our regulations are more extensive, robust than the draft regulations than the city of Greeley's. Pardon?
In what ways?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the yellow light areas where that we've included in the version of the draft aren't included in Greeley's regulations. So, for example, water quality monitoring, a lot of the other areas that we have as a requirement aren't in those Greeley regulations. I mean, I know that they have generally most of their regulations go by the state rules and regulations in terms of their review. I know that they have some provisions regarding wildlife impacts, which we currently have in our existing regulations, and we're planning to continue those in our draft regulations.
Councilmember Witt, if I could comment on that. As we reported in previous council communications, we're unaware of any local jurisdictions that have adopted regs within the last 9 months to a year. So certainly within this phase of oil and gas development, the city of Longmont would be the most aggressive. I was talking to our special counsel, Phil Barber. He also had the same sort of evaluation of our regulations that we were treading into a number of yellow light areas, but doing it in a manner that is prudent risk-taking, where we believe they are defensible in areas that will protect the community while not unduly exposing us to risk of litigation and liability.
And I will say that Greeley, in terms of the city of Greeley, I don't believe that they've amended their regulations substantially since the early to mid-90s.
That was going to be my question, is when did Greeley remind me when that court case was when they tried to ban fracking?
1992.
Okay, and then they put in this set of regulations that they've been living with for almost 10 years now, right? Yes.
Or longer.
Or longer. All right. So, so that's why I want to know how do ours compare with theirs, because obviously they've been living with these regulations and oil development in their area. So I just want to know how we compare. And is our community substantially different from Greeley? Do we have special, do we have any evidence in Greeley of environmental degradation and health degradation in Greeley under their regulations? Anyway, just some food for thought.
I know they have approximately 400 wells in the Greeley city limits. I haven't spoken with them personally to find out if they have specific concerns or issues regarding the environmental or issues. So.
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, a couple of areas I think that we're still deficient in here is that while you've stated that schools are mostly in residential areas, I can think of charter schools that are differently sited. In fact, we've got a charter school, Twin Peaks, that sits in an industrial zone. I mean, next door to it is a very heavy industrial use that's unannexed island of land, and it's basically a junkyard. And so what provision do we have for charter schools such as Twin Peaks, and also Flagstaff sits in an industrial park, to protect charter schools?
Well, we currently, you're right, I mean, those two specific charter schools, Twin Peaks and Flagstaff, are in mixed industrial zoning districts. And so I believe they are in areas which would be classified based upon the definition of a building unit by the state rules as a high density area. So if there was, and I guess on the Twin Peaks Charter Academy site, which is west of Francis, east of Sunset, north of Nelson Road, and south of Boston Avenue, I guess if a oil and gas operation proposed to the north of that site, say for example near the Colorado Materials, we'd have to take a look at that and see if that area could potentially would qualify as a high-density area. There are specific, obviously, setback requirements from institutional facilities for high-density areas. There's the 350-foot setback, but for production facilities, there's also a 500-foot setback for production facilities.
It seems in that zone, though, that you could walk off 500 feet easily just because of the way the adjacent uses are and the streets are set up. Even though there's a mobile home community in close proximity, you could locate a facility within a 500-foot buffer easily. And certainly, if that landowner had decided to annex into the city, and neither that property or an adjacent one is in the county. If the county regulations, as others have pointed out, become stricter than the cities, we could be creating some islands where, we could potentially have these heavy industrial prior use designations and then still not have an ability to adequately regulate something where there is an existing school. That's a really big concern of mine, because the city has nothing to do with the location or enabling of charter schools to be opened. So how would we even know?
So I guess the other potential thing that could be looked at is to talk to the school district regarding the school district potentially making an application for those two sites as designated outside activity areas. I don't know if they would meet the definition or qualify, but that's something we could certainly approach the state on in concert with the school district and see if they're interested in considering that.
But if the school district fails to pick up on that regulatory piece, then, we're sort of in a box where, they may, without knowledge, how would they know? They didn't know anything about the rider well. They didn't know a lot of when they cite schools, what the potentials are in the future for oil and gas exploration and extraction. So I think my point is we don't have a very good track record on that. One other question that when we were talking, when you were speaking around the issue of the industrial use, I think we also need to consider something for areas that are already identified urban renewal authorities, because those are areas the city has already studied as subject to change and, if you will, innovations in future land use. In particular, the Southwest Urban Renewal Authority has a lot of heavy industry industrial zones within that, and the city has already identified that as a potential TIF district and is looking to make some mitigation. The heavy industrial use was considered a blight, as I recall. So how would we potentially reconcile having a URA and a storage, an application for conditional use to put some waste storage in an urban renewal authority area where we've already taken a pledge to mitigate blight? So I would look at writing something additional in, not just for residential areas, but for URAs as well, because potentially we do have a built-up conflict already. It might be that a landowner might decide it's better to be a brownfield forever, if they're already a brownfield, and get additional money to locate a waste facility, where the city's already identified, in the case of the Southwest Urban Renewal Authority area, almost 10 years ago, potential for change.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. A couple questions and then some feelings and thoughts. First question, on page 12, line 25, where it says recommended standard and then it's underlined. And then the paragraph starts on line 27, wells in production facilities shall be 750 feet or more from any occupied building or occupied building permitted for construction. Does that include schools?
Yes.
Okay. So my question, so it doesn't look, so my understanding is that this isn't really a residential zone statement. Basically, if it's an occupied building, we're saying that's the zone, correct?
Right. It could be a commercial building as well, or industrial building.
Okay, so the real difference here is instead of any building, it's now going to occupied building. It's not just a turkey shed or a storage facility. It's actually people are there. Difference is animals, items, things versus now we're moving to people, right? Okay. Okay, that cleared up that concern. That's covered. Next question I had was on reverse setbacks on page 12, line 44. I noticed there's some X's there.
Yes.
Do we have any data? I mean, that's one of my concerns. I mean, it's not the wells, it wasn't the operator's fault that the school in the residential area got built there. So my question is, okay, so if we could go back in time, what number would we have put in? Has staff done any research, thought about it?
Councilmember Bagley, those X's on page 12 of the draft regulations, page 55 of your packet on lines 45 and 46, those are specific areas that we're continuing to research on. We've looked at some jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions allow platting over plugged-in abandoned wells as long as the site's been remediated. But we want to continue to do some research before we bring forward an ordinance to, obviously put some numbers in those areas that we feel are appropriate for setbacks from those types of facilities.
Okay. And I guess the comment I had is I just want to make at least my thoughts and feelings clear. It's a very uncomfortable night. I cannot disagree with the vast majority of the comments that have been stated. Here are my thoughts. Over the last 6 to 8 weeks, as I've sat on the Governor's Oil and Gas Task Force, I have gotten multiple calls. I have gotten multiple office visits from industry officials, from industry experts, consultants, etc. I've been told that I'm an arrogant prick. I have been told that I need to keep my mouth shut. I've been told all kinds of things. But the one thing that first of all, a little background. The reason why I was kind of disanimated on the Oil and Gas Commission is because apparently in 2008 there was a big to-do over oil and gas regulation. And apparently back then our state legislatures, or our legislative leaders came up with this agreement that said, look, we're not going to give any more. This is the last thing we're ever going to give on. We're done. So apparently some people are still holding to this idea that in 2008, the line was drawn in the sand and now nobody's going to give an inch. And so we're fools for thinking that, we're going to push that line. My response was simply, I wasn't on city council in 2008. Longmont wasn't involved in the discussion in 2008, so I would appreciate the opportunity to continue talking about these things. On the Oil and Gas Task Force, there were some comments in the public invited to be heard. I have zero faith that the stakeholder meeting on setbacks is going to have any difference whatsoever, merely because I asked at the last meeting of the Oil and Gas Task Force, I wanted to talk about setbacks. I thought I was going to get shot. I asked the industry, what do you think is fair as far as setbacks go? And their response was, where they are now. We don't want to move off the setbacks, period, full stop. I was like, okay, I don't necessarily agree, but that was their response. So the way I look at it is, again, another movie analogy. I like movies. I kind of look at it as like Star Trek. The board, resistance is futile. And the problem is there's a difference, the history, just letting you know my thoughts. Vote me in, vote me out, recall me, whatever. These are my thoughts. Back in the day, you had several municipalities in Colorado that tried to prohibit drilling. Greeley tried, and they got beat down. Frederick tried on setbacks and got beat down. You have several lawsuits that show that the industry, when they come against a municipality, they win. You talk to Greeley municipal officials and people who live there,
how do they feel after they tried to stand up to the industry and then they lose? It's not a good feeling. I was approached by one mayor at the Oil and Gas Commission, and he put his arm on my shoulder and he says, "You should just read our regs. We've been down this road before, and we lost. So just save yourself some trouble and heartache and just give up. Really, be quiet, and let's just get this done." And so that was the comment that started me thinking, and I had the opportunity, as we drove down to the Oil and Gas Task Force, I had the opportunity to drive down with Eugene May, our city attorney. He didn't go down as my attorney. I didn't go down as a city council member, but he went down because he wanted to learn, and we had some interesting conversations on the way back and forth in the car. And my feeling is that I don't want to overstep, because if we overstep, what's going to happen is we're going to lose. I don't want to lose. What I want is I want to basically say, look, stop, make it a defensible position, and basically say, you can't win this time. And that starts to turn the tide. And when I say turn the tide, what I mean is that the state, like, for example, I've been swayed. In the very beginning, if you'll recall, my whole thoughts and my comments in the beginning were, no, we want state regulation because we have this checkerboard of areas out there by Union Reservoir in Ward 1, and we need the state, not us. I'm off that now, because the state is not going to be able to do that. We need local control, etc., as much as we can. Easy. You're not going to be happy with me. So I look at this as, and I don't think anybody on council, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I get the impression that nobody here is scared of a lawsuit. On the contrary, I think I welcomed it when I was down there in Denver. And I know that because I was approached by the heads of the associations from the industry, and literally the last thing that was stated at the Oil and Gas Task Force was, well, we're just going to have to litigate some of these things. And I made it clear that the direction that I see Longmont heading is passing the regulations, and they flat out said, well, that's fine. We'll see you in court. And so litigation is coming. That's not the question. I don't want to avoid litigation. What I want to avoid is just losing should we litigate. And so to me, the regs that we have, they don't go, the comments that are getting made tonight are a lot of the comments that I was making to the state legislature, to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And the frustration, I'm sure that many of the people who expressed their feelings and thoughts, the public invited to be heard, you're feeling exactly how I felt. So, but there's not a lot we can do if we just pass the regs, we go over the line, and then, yeah, we can feel good, but we're going to get beat down and we're back to square one. I'm of the opinion that what we need to do is push the line as far as we can, draw it a little further than it is now, and be able to say, ha-ha, we've made up some ground. And the reason why I think that's possible is because unlike before, the oil and gas industry is not going into Greeley and then 10 years later into Frederick and then into, they're now, with the shale formations, they're now going into the entire Front Range. They're pushing up on Longmont, they're pushing up on Boulder, they're pushing up on Colorado Springs. So instead of just picking us off one at a time, the Borg are now coming into the Front Range, and people are aware. And so whenever I start, even as a private practice attorney, I always say, okay, well, forget the law for a second. What's the sentiment of the judge and the people, and how's this going to play out? The tide is kind of ready to turn. And if we overstep, the law's already been established, and we lose right away. Whereas if we put in some incremental steps, I think we'll have success. I really do. There was a Stanford study called Stickers on Windows, Billboards on Lawns. And if I've never shared this before, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for speaking too long and sharing another story. Then I'll shut up. But years ago, Stanford did this study where they went down one side of the street and they basically said, would you please put this Save the Environment sticker on your window? And everybody said yes. Well, 30 days later, they then went back with big billboards, same sticker, and they said, well, can we put it on your lawn? They did that with this side of the street that already had stickers, and they did it on this side of the street that had nothing. No one accepted the billboard. Whereas quite a few people said, sure, you already put a sticker on, let's put the billboard on. The problem now with this fight, fracking, no fracking, oil and gas, yes, no, is simply that the cities have yet to win ever. We need a victory. So I would like to push forward, especially on this setback regarding residential zones. And I'm telling you right now, there will be litigation. It will get heated. The industry is not going to stand by. And that is going to be the battleground. So as I read these regs, I look at that. That's kind of my thoughts. Those are my feelings. So when I vote to actually approve the regs, it's because I look at it as one bullet in a volley rather than let's fight the war right now, because I don't think we can win the war right now. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I guess I'd kind of like to weigh in a little bit. I agree with a lot what Brian says. I admire him, and I appreciate everything he did on the task force. And I agree with a lot of things that Eugene's telling us, that, it's futile if we have 0% chance to win something. It would be irresponsible to waste. If someone told me we had a 20% or a 25% chance, I would say, let's go to bat. I'd say that in a heartbeat, and I think everybody on council would say, if we got a 20, 25% chance, let's throw the dice, let's stand up for our community. This thing has kept me awake literally at night sometimes, because, I am torn that the state is acting, they have their laws, and we're supposed to uphold the state laws, and yet the citizens elected me to be their mayor, and I feel responsible for their health and welfare. And I knew if I lived on County Line Road and they were going to put a multi-head drilling well, I'd take a 2-week vacation during that process, and then I would still be concerned. Even when it's all said and done, those tanks still outgas. And, as more and more information becomes available as to how this affects people's health, it gives us more and more ammunition. And I'm just torn. This thing just tears me up inside. And but I don't know what else we can do except for to try to win the little battles. It's pretty upsetting to me. So, anyway, Councilmember Santos.
Thank you, Mayor. No, and I would agree with what you and Councilmember Bagley has said. Folks in public invited to be heard, insinuations on council members. I can't, in being in the meetings that we've had, public and private, that I can't say that one member of council has not taken this seriously or is trying to look at a corporation over the residents of this community. No, I can't think of a single one. Everyone has, whether we read material somebody gave us, which maybe some of us did, but maybe we just respectfully declined what you gave us. I can't think of myself. I have gone through numerous pages on pages of this report to that report to this report. We got sent the NOAA report yesterday. Went through all 20 pages, read all that. I'm looking for more. I was talking to Dale just yesterday. We need a little bit more of a regional cooperation when it comes to air monitoring. I'd like to see eventually that we may have to buy a piece of equipment. We might have to have a department of oil and gas. But with these oil and gas regs, and I will definitely echo what Brian said, Councilmember Bagley, excuse me. I would rather know that there's a potential win in here, and you guys, staff has done a fantastic job trying to find ways that can get us into the red, yellow areas without getting a complete beatdown in litigation. I like the recommended requirements. I think those are solid. Could they be a little bit more stringent? Yes, but then again, as Councilmember Bagley said, we're looking for a win. No one has won. There's another study that's about to come out from the EPA about oil and gas emissions, whether or not there could be potential where the setbacks are greater. Right now, we default to the minimum. You know, if the the Oil and Gas Commission decide to make those greater, that's the minimum. So I'm looking forward to it. With that, I would move that the staff prepare an ordinance based on the draft regulations as written.
Second.
The only other thing I have to say is it was mentioned in an editorial that you have to stand up for your community. And what I'll say is to that person that wrote it, I see it's more of a gambler. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. And some of these issues, you got to know when to walk away. I believe we're holding a good set of cards with these regulations. Are they the best possible that everyone's going to be happy with? Oil people, residents, people who want to ban, drilling completely? No. But I believe it's the best set, and I welcome a little bit of litigation because I think that the staff has done a fantastic job drafting these regs.
Could I ask you a question, Brian? Do you expect that when people come forward with these applications, I assume that we're going to do everything we can at the city level to cite these places as far away as we can and give them options and basically have these memorandums of understanding. And, just because we say 350 feet from residentials, we're hopefully striving for a lot more than that. Can you comment on that?
Mayor, that is correct. I mean, that is certainly our intent, is to work not only through the, the LGD process, but also our local land use process and surface use agreements for properties that the city has control over, to cite those facilities as far away as reasonably possible from occupied structures, residences, schools, other facilities that might be potentially adversely impacted by oil and gas facilities.
Councilmember Levison.
Yes, Mayor. I don't want to speak for a second time unless other council members who have not spoken would like to speak. So, do you mind? Okay, thank you. I'm not going to support this because I think we need to take a little more risk here. And I know I'm probably going to be in the minority, and please don't clap. I'm just wondering if they'd come after us if we put 351 feet or 350 feet and 6 inches. Are they going to litigate us over 1 foot because we defied them? So if you defy them over a foot, you might as well defy them over 100 or 200 or 300. I mean, maybe we should try it. Maybe we should say our setbacks are 351 feet. So maybe we could get a win for a foot. Maybe that's the the finger comes out of the dike then, and some other city says 352, and it becomes an auction. And I'm just curious. It's going to come, and basically, I think we could do better. I actually still had a couple of questions that I didn't cover. On page 6, when on line 9, where we talk about the approval period, there was a cross out from 1 to 2 years. What's our normal approval period for conditional use permits and that sort of thing? Is that falling within our normal regulation?
The normal approval period is 1 year for a conditional use process, although the state, when they approve a permit, is a 2-year period. So we wanted to make that approval consistent with the state's approval period.
But under normal circumstances, we have land use control over conditional uses. So why wouldn't we follow our own regulations and make an exception in this case for something that might be inconsistent, but it's a yellow light area? We have land use control.
Well, I mean, I guess if the city had approved a conditional use permit for an oil and gas operation, and the state had approved it as well. And the state's permit was still valid for another additional year. We just didn't feel it was worthwhile to put them through another process if that state permit was still valid.
But isn't that unfair to other businesses that, might have some other regulatory scheme also that would allow them, I could think of, maybe industrial waste zones or whatever. There might be some other industry that would have that same regulation. So would we change it for every other industry that had a regulatory conflict?
I guess if another industrial use brought that to our attention, that there was a potential conflict with a state rule or a federal rule, we'd take that in consideration in terms of the approval period for that type of conditional use.
But not necessarily. Yeah. Okay. So that there was that question, but the other question I had is on page 9 of the regulation, 52 of our packet, talking about hazard areas. That when there are hazards, says that land should not be developed for oil and gas well facilities and operations until hazards that have been identified, removed, or avoided. My question was that if you've got a loss of development rights because of a hazard that was created by the someone that's permitted, who reimburses a surface landowner for loss of use? If I guess that's regulated under the surface land use agreement, but if you've got land that's tainted and it was going to be potentially residences, then the amount of land that was had the toxic spill or something would reduce the rest of the land that was usable surface land. So do we have anything in our regulations that could require some kind of mitigation of surface rights loss?
Mayor and Council, two thoughts on that. One, under COGCC regs, the operator is responsible for plugging and abandoning and remediating the site. And secondly, between those two private parties, it's a private party action. I mean, that's between a landowner and a user of that land. So I'm not sure that it's the right role for the city to get in the middle of that.
And then one thing that I had mentioned a long time ago is just like the federal government has passed laws requiring real estate notice on lead paint for properties built prior to 1979. I really think that due to, frankly, homeowners who have no idea that there's potential in the future for wells right behind a house that might only be a year or two old, I would like to look into some kind of notice where property owners for potential well sites are notified, as part of, notification. Just like wouldn't we notify them of other kind of hazards? And I know the lead paint is a federal, but don't we have a responsibility to do that, to notify people of a hazardous condition? Do we have any obligation? I'm just throwing that out there because, I really do think that people that had tried to do due diligence, and yet, there's not enough access to information, I think that we should be able to provide something.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. Two things. Sarah Levison, Councilmember Levison. Sorry. Yeah, yes, sir. I guess the one thing that I would like to see that maybe the city hasn't done is the local government designee process, a formal staff response to what will we do, how will we behave, what is the process, what will the LGD do. pre-application, as soon as we find out about it, what is the process? Who gets notice? What will our city response be? What are our katas, for our oil and gas ninja? Because we heard a lot from the Oil and Gas Task Force that if we don't pick up on it, it's our fault. We should have an LGD and we need to be on it. So my question is, do we have some type of system or process in place that Mr. Schumacher would, follow, or if not him, someone else? And if not, I would propose and thus move that we actually instruct staff to come up with an LGD process that we are going to follow. I know we have a motion on the floor. I can make that motion later, but it's a good idea anyway. And then the what? Yeah. What is the current motion? Oh, yeah. So I guess I would offer I don't know if it's a friendly amendment, just an amendment that we also instruct staff that along with the oil and gas regulations, we actually have staff prepare a local government designee process that the city will design, engage, and follow. And then the other thing is, I would actually like to make a plea to my council member, Levison. I know you're only in the minority, and it would only be 1, 2, 3 votes maybe. And I know that my heart wants to listen to the public invited to be heard and make people happy and tell people, stick it, industry. But at the same time, I know that as much passion we heard here, the industry is way more passionate about not seeing us pass these regs. And I think we need to stand strong as a city, and when they come, they do know that we're going to defend, and we're not scared of litigation. And I would hope that we could be unanimous in supporting our staff and basically saying, look, let's pass the regs, and then whatever happens, happens. And I don't want to give the impression that we're wishy-washy on anything. That is my hope.
I guess I'd like to make just a couple of comments. Again, I agree with what Brian's telling us, and the fact that 2 attorneys here are telling me that we've got a 0% chance of winning the setback battle. If someone told me we got a 10% chance, I would say I would fight this tooth and nail. But if I'm told that we have no chance, it's pretty scary. I think the way we got to fight this battle is not here in the city, but we got to work on our state legislators. I know that Matt Jones tried to get a 1,000-foot setback passed, and it was shot down in committee. But I think, this is just the first battle. But when I started looking at all these this whole topic and educating myself, I quickly became less worried about water pollution. I know we know how to go down to 8,000 feet and not pollute our water. If you have a good operator and you're following the right process, using the right materials, we're well insulated. The water pollution is a very small, there are surface spills, but the probability of water pollution causing a problem is, fracking causing a problem with water pollution here where we're going down 8,000 feet is pretty remote. But the probability of causing air pollution is quite probable, particularly when it's 150 feet from someone's house. I know if a drilling platform went up next to my house, I would move. My health is more important to me than taking that risk. And but I don't know what else we can do at this point. So I guess that's my comments. Councilmember Witt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the points that have been made that we've chosen defensible ground upon which to stand, and I think that Longmont has a small part to play in the ongoing dialogue that we're having in Colorado at this time. Although I do believe that we could probably accomplish the same ends through memorandums of agreement with the different operators. I think that we have come thus far, and we have very good, sound recommendations and a plan set forth that has been created over a great deal of time. And so that is why I think that we we support it. And although it would be great to play the populist card at this time, we are not here to be popular. We are here to make good public policy. And that sometimes makes us unpopular. And so I feel that what we as a community and council and staff have put together is prudent, it's reasonable, it's defensible, and it moves the ball down the court. And that's why I'm supporting it. And Councilmember Levison, please join us.
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Santos, you didn't express opinion when you were moving this to consider maybe adding the URA planned areas to our residential. So I'm wondering, you know, given the fact that we do have a URA that has a lot of industrial uses, and the URA was set up to mitigate blight that was seen on that property, I think it would be prudent if we added the Urban Renewal Authority areas in with this the residential designation. So I'm asking you to consider adding that to our motion.
Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I agree with my fellow council members Bagley and Katie Witt and Gabe. I am deeply offended by those who would state that council members are bought and paid for by oil and gas. My fellow council members are all honorable people, and if you think that threats will make us bend to something that we think is bad public policy, that's just not the case. We won't be bullied by you or oil and gas companies. We will do what we feel is good public policy for our community. I did have one question. Is there something, or can we put something in our policy to notify neighbors of completion of drilling? I think that's a valid point that someone made tonight.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Did I get a second on my motion, by the way? So we have to wait?
Santos.
I'll accept Councilmember Bagley's suggestion if it's okay with the second. Regarding the other part, I wouldn't mind having staff look at it first to see if we can do that regarding the urban renewal area. So, but I'll take that from Councilmember Bagley. It's okay with the second?
It is fine.
Okay. So the friendly amendment's been accepted.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. And then Eugene, I've got a question for you. So the question, so it's not a residential zone. It's basically a residential building. It's a different take on the whole setback thing, which I think is genius. But so my question was, we've heard, and I'm unfamiliar with these terms. I know what the Urban Renewal Authority is, but we've heard a challenge to specify residential zones. But again, that's everything that's inhabited by people would be a residential zone. But I also heard the term general industry zone and a public zone. Are you familiar with what those mean and what part that would play, if any, in the regs? Or do you need time to think about it? Or you can answer.
Sorry, Gene.
LGD.
So I wish I had a zoning map up on the wall. But you can use the comprehensive map behind Councilmember Levison just for reference. Good frame of reference for residential zoning districts, those areas that are colored as yellow or orange or brown on that map. So those are areas that would be, if they're within the city limits, that's obviously the comprehensive plan map, that's land use designations for existing and future land uses. But if they're within the city limits and zoned as residential, then the oil and gas operations would not be allowed within those areas. The other component is the oil and gas waste disposal facilities. That's where those would be limited, classified as heavy industrial uses, which would be limited to those zoning districts, such as general industrial. And the comprehensive plan map doesn't show just the general industrial zoning districts. There are not that many general industrial zoning districts within the community. For reference, on that particular map, industrial districts in general are shown as the gray areas. And then the public areas, the public zoning, those are areas that are currently are city parks and golf courses primarily, and maybe some other limited city facilities that are also zoned as public uses. So, for example, maybe some of the city maintenance facilities might be zoned public as well. But it's primarily parks and golf courses that are zoned public.
So my question is, I noticed in the regs that we say that we're going to apply for outside designated or designated outside activity areas, and I understand that that's not within our purview and our stewardship in order to designate those. But I still think it's a good idea to provide a supplement saying these are the areas that we are going to apply for. In law, you've got patent and patent pending. Patent pending is more powerful because nobody knows what's going to happen. They don't want to waste their time or their money. And so is there a reason why we pulled back off this is going to be where we plan on asking for designated outside activity areas?
We didn't specifically indicate those in the regulations. We did in the supplemental March 27th council communication, the information item. We talked about that briefly as some of those other areas that we're exploring in terms of the outside activity areas, and we touched upon those specific areas that we're looking at initially applying for, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, those being the golf courses, obviously the city-owned golf courses. Fox Hill Country Club is privately owned and it's outside of the city limits. We've got the soccer fields at Sandstone Ranch, the recreation area of Union Reservoir, and the kind of the recreation component or trail around Lake McIntosh area. Those are the areas that we're looking at initially for making an application to the state.
My only concern is, what if they say no? I mean, I'd rather have, hey, this is where we're going to apply, and have everything up in the air, rather than apply and then have them come back and they told us, Eugene, that you can apply, but you have to pinpoint where we're going to allow drilling activity. So that just gives me a little bit of trepidation.
So, Councilmember Bagley, as we reported earlier, Sandstone Ranch and the ball fields, as we understand, is the only designated outside activity area in the state. It's a new area for the COGCC, and we are having discussions with them as to what their opinion is regarding our whole portfolio of areas we would like to have designated. And so, in alignment with your theme, we want to win, we were thinking of bringing forth perhaps our application in 2 phases, going forward with those areas which we think we would gain some success in designation, understand the process, understand the thinking of the commission when we're asking for these things, and then evaluate our second phase of properties, because we like to win. We don't like to lose, and you don't want them to say no. And so, locking it into the regulation didn't really seem appropriate, since these are matters subject to evaluation and negotiation with the COGCC.
We want to win. That's a good argument. Okay, I can buy that. Thanks.
Councilmember Samori.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. While I appreciate the feelings and sentiments of the speakers that came before us tonight, as has been stated, we have to take into consideration not only your feelings, our feelings, but we also have to take into consideration the rule of law. And I applaud staff for coming up with an ordinance that's defensible and implementable. And I would hope that by us passing it unanimously, that our surrounding communities will be encouraged to push the envelope a little bit themselves. And eventually maybe we can act as one unit and change the state legislation.
Well, I guess it's seen Councilmember Witt.
I didn't hear the resolution about, Councilmember Levison mentioned URAs. Did we come to some conclusion about whether to incorporate that or not?
Go ahead, Gabe.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I just asked for staff to look at it, if that'll work, before we put it in anything else.
All right, I guess we're ready to vote on the amendment and with the friendly amendment added. Okay, it passes 6-1 with Councilmember Levison dissenting. Okay, are there any comments from council members? Councilmember Witt?
So is this mayor and council comments?
Yep, it's mayor and council
Yay.
comments now.
Wow, it came up so quick. I did want to mention, I'm taking a page out of Bonnie Finley's book, and I happened to go by a new business here in town, and I'm trying to look for their card so I don't mess up the name. Oh, stop. It's the new coffee shop on 5th and Main, La Bella Vita. Is that correct? I haven't found that darn card yet, but they have gluten-free baked items. I had an Italian soda, which was awesome, and they had a devastatingly delicious sounding thing called a truffle, which is pretty much melted chocolate with some fruit in it. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, go to La Bella Vita, which is in the, I believe it's the Kaufman building, that beautiful building. Hanson building, excuse me. Yes, the Hanson building in the basement. Great. It was great food. I was so focused on the food, I just forgot where I was. It transported me, literally. So have a look.
Councilmember Santos.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge that several members of council and the mayor were privileged enough to go to the Public Safety Awards ceremony last Friday. It was very humbling to be in the audience and watch our officers and residents get citations of merit or appreciation. One officer twice got Medal of Valor. It just humbles and just goes to show that we really have some great public safety employees, whether they're in the police department or in fire. It was a very nice evening. Harold and his wife were able to come, and so I would encourage members of council next year when this comes up to try to attend.
I guess I'm going to step in here a little bit out of order. We read these proclamations all the time, and so I started thinking about the radon proclamation that I did a month or so ago, and I decided, maybe I should have my house tested, and sure enough, I had it tested, and I had the radon levels about twice what they should be, so went ahead and started to get a mitigation process. So anyway, we would remind everybody that hasn't had their house here in Longmont tested for radon to do that. Councilmember Smorey.
So stealing Councilmember Finley's thunder, there's another bakery and coffee shop that opened in town too.
We're all on diets.
Well, we can drive by and smell the fresh baked goods. And actually, I forgot the name, but they are next to Party. They are next to Party America, because I just drove by tonight and stopped by and check them out. They're new in town. I think it starts with an R, but I can't fully remember the name.
I have the invite. Yeah. It's coming up. Roma Cake House.
Yes.
Romana Cake
Yeah.
House.
It's just west of the old Walmart.
Councilmember Finley.
Well, since we have several businesses mentioned here this evening, I would like to encourage all businesses to belong to the Chamber of Commerce here in Longmont. It's a wonderful chamber. It does great things for our businesses here in town, and I would encourage all those new businesses to join the Longmont Chamber of Commerce.
Councilmember Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad it got to my time to speak without anybody mentioning the great event today called Doing Democracy Day that was organized by staff from Silver Creek High School and included students from most of St. Vrain Valley School District. And the idea of doing democracy is that the students pick their topics of local interest and issues that are current for us in the school district that are picked, and then they assign the kids to a topic at random, and they were to interview people that showed up this morning, policymakers and leaders, and find out information, do a little bit of research, and then put together a presentation in about 50 minutes and have it judged. And it was really an interesting experience. I had participated in a previous year for about an hour, but I did 5 or 6 hours worth of participation today and found it very enjoyable. In fact, one of our speakers this evening was a student who presented about fracking today, and I was glad to see him follow up with the topic and speak tonight. And as I told the students, I said, all of your good ideas I intend to steal, but I will give you credit for them. So there were some very interesting ideas around the mall development. School vouchers was one of the topics, and the school voucher presentation group is the one who won the day as the highest rated one. And then there was also another interesting topic around whether city council elections should be partisan or nonpartisan, and the issue of money in local elections. And gosh, what were some of the other topics? I know there was one about whether or not every student should be given a computer in school, and also whether or not we should start school for high school at a later time due to the fact that teenagers can't get up in the morning. Neither some kids, some adults either. It's not pleasant getting up with a high schooler at 5:30 in the morning. But I thought it was a really rewarding day, and the most encouraging thing was how fresh the approach was of students who are not so jaded by having these policy issues, learning about them in fits and starts as we do, but having them propose solutions that, we all know would not be possible. But to hear that they are willing, to try, and they felt that some of the suggestions were perfectly reasonable and doable gives us encouragement. So gives me personal encouragement. So I thank them, and I thank the offer to participate in the day. So I'd encourage others to try it out if you have some time next year.
Councilmember Witt.
Okay, I had to look it up. Lavita Bella. Sorry. And one more thing. This April 27th, it's a second reminder, April 27th at the Longmont Senior Center from 5 until 7. They're having an open house. It's going to be all sorts of fun. Thank you.
Okay, City Manager, any comments?
No comments.
City Attorney, any comments?
No comments, Mayor.
We are adjourned.